tonight. Iran on the forefront, with the U.S. making major military moves. What sending a carrier group and bomber force to the Middle East means for the region.
And it's a date. Maybe. When and if Bob Mueller will testify in Congress.
None of us get to opt out of suffering.
Plus, the impact of a Christian author is felt in the wake of her untimely death.
And alive from New York.
This is a baby!
The Times Square event that has all eyes on the womb.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The United States flexing its military might in the Middle East. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. Well, the U.S. has deployed a carrier strike group to the Middle East, sending a very clear message to Iran.
It's a move that aims to stop any plans the regime might have of attacking American forces or allies like Israel. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy starts us off with tonight's top story.
The U.S. warns any attack will be met with unrelenting force, but what is not clear is how Iran will respond. Signs of growing trouble with Iran surfaced in April when the White House designated Iran's Revolutionary Guard a terrorist group. The situation was all the talk on Friday's Faith Nation.
What stories are we not talking about that we should be?
Well, I think one that's sort of bubbling under the surface that I'm very focused on is Iran and what the Trump administration is doing with Iran.
Over the weekend, the White House made a stunning move to deploy a carrier strike group to the Middle East as a safety measure against any potential attacks by Iran. The Abraham Lincoln Aircraft Carrier and Bomber Task Force, which includes 4 ships, 9 air squadrons, and about 6,000 sailors, is now en route from the Mediterranean. National Security Advisor John Bolton said the signs were there. Do you think Iran was preparing to attack U.S. forces in the region?
I think, of course, it is a possibility. In the open source right now, it is Israel and Saudi Arabia actively checking Iranian aggression.
Bolton says the U.S. wants Iran to know that unrelenting force will meet any attack on U.S. interest or its allies. Do you believe Iran is one of the forces behind the recent violence in Gaza?
I think Iran, as a patron of Hamas, is always involved in any kind of broader attacks by Palestinian terrorist groups against the state of Israel.
Bolton adds the U.S. is not seeking war with Iran, but are fully prepared to respond to any attack. Last month, the White House said it would not extend waivers to countries that bought Iranian oil. It's a part of the president's maximum pressure campaign to target Iran's economy.
We clearly have the capability to check Iranian aggression in the region. The long-standing question is, do we have the resolve? Sending in this carrier strike group definitely says we have the resolve.
Wednesday is the 1-year anniversary of the U.S. pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. We now wait to see how Iran will respond once the carrier has arrived. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Ben. And this all comes as Christianity is spreading in the region. CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas joins us now with part of this story.
George, you've been on the phone with a source who just returned from Iran. What is he telling you?
Yes, this particular source has been traveling to the Islamic Republic for the last 2 decades. He has made more than 36 trips into the Islamic Republic. He just got back. He visited about 6 strategic key cities across Iran. And Jenna, the question he got from almost every person he spoke to in these 6 different locations was the question, when is the United States going to attack Iran? And it was not asked in a negative way or in an angry way. It was asked from the perspective of, we cannot wait for you to attack our nation. Why? Because Iran is in the midst of a dire economic situation. Last year, one United States dollar got you about 50,000 riyal, the Iranian currency. Today, on the black market, it's about 150,000 riyals. So to put this into perspective, last year, if you went to your neighborhood Chick-fil-A and bought a sandwich, you would pay about $7. Today, it's about $20. What does this mean? The price of milk, eggs, oil, flour, everything is skyrocketing, but people's wages are not going up to keep up with the hyperinflation. So in the midst of all this is happening, the hardship is putting such pressure clear on the average Iranian that they are fed up with the regime, and they know that the crippling sanctions against the Islamic Republic is beginning to hurt them severely. And by the way, I asked my source, are they angry with the United States or blame the United States for their economic woes? On the contrary, they put the blame squarely on the Islamic Republic and the ruling clerics.
George, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo just recently spoke saying that his goal is to get Iran to behave like a normal nation after seeing activity that indicates escalation.
That's right. In fact, here's what Axios, as we come on the air, Axios is reporting that part of the reason for this deployment to the Med is because 2 weeks ago, Israel's head of national security, Meir Ben Shabbat, met with officials at the White House, and it is in fact the intelligence services of Israel, the Mossad, who hand-delivered information to the White House saying that there is a credible threat of Iranian forces and its proxies targeting U.S. interests in the region. What could some of those interests be? For example, we have troops stationed in Bahrain. We have troops stationed in Afghanistan, in Syria. And so this was the intelligence that was brought forward to the United States 2 weeks ago at a meeting with John Bolton, the National Security Advisor. And that is why we're seeing this happening today.
Yeah, George, Iran's Minister of Intelligence made a pretty surprising admission over the weekend about Christianity. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so he basically said that Christianity was spreading in parts of the country and that there was this sort of tension that Iranians felt with the mullahs, the ruling clerics, and how they were constantly fighting with each other, and people were looking for peace in the midst of all of this economic turmoil. The reality, as we have been reporting here at CBN News for such a long time, Christianity is the one place in the world where Christianity is growing the fastest. It is right here. You see the images. It's happening in Iran. It is not happening in parts of Iran. It is happening across the country. And it is one of the most untold stories. But folks here at CBN News, they're getting it.
All right, George Thomas, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, Democrats are taking steps at holding Attorney General William Barr in contempt of Congress for failing to provide an unredacted version of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report. The deadline came and went at 9 o'clock this morning. For more now, we turn to our Capitol Hill correspondent, Abigail Robertson. Abigail, what's the next step here?
Well, on Wednesday, the House Judiciary Committee will mark up a contempt citation for Attorney General Barr for not delivering to them the full unredacted Mueller report by their deadline of this morning. Now, Democrats are already upset Barr did not testify here on the Hill last week because Democrats and the Department of Justice could not agree over who would question Barr. Democrats wanted members of their council to question him, and the Department of Justice said no way. That was unacceptable. So this is just more fuel added to an already blazing fire. Now, the Attorney General has made a less redacted version of the Mueller investigation available to select Republicans and Democrats at the Department of Justice, but so far we have not seen any Democrats go to view that less redacted version. And the Department of Justice says that legally they cannot release the full Mueller report because of grand jury material that is inside of it.
Abigail, how are Republicans on the Hill reacting to this move?
Well, the ranking Republican on the House Judiciary Committee, Doug Collins, says that he believes holding Barr in contempt, this move to do that, is just another play at tearing down President Trump. He released a statement earlier today on Twitter saying that Democrats know Attorney General Barr cannot release an unredacted report without breaking the law. He believes if Democrats really want to see this, they should be introducing legislation to allow Barr to release grand jury material instead of moving forward with holding him in contempt.
Abigail, we know right now he's scheduled to appear, but there's some question about it. So will Robert Mueller testify before Congress?
Well, yes, right now Robert Mueller is set to testify on May 15th. President Trump to the House Judiciary Committee. Now, President Trump over the weekend released his sentiments on this, saying on Twitter, saying that he does not feel like Mueller should testify. He said, "Why would the Democrats in Congress now need Robert Mueller to testify? Are they looking for a redo because they hated seeing the strong no collusion conclusion? There was no crime except on the other side and no obstruction. Bob Mueller should not testify. No redos for the Dems." But other Republicans actually say that they wouldn't mind having him testify here on the Hill. Senator Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, on Friday sent a letter to Robert Mueller inviting him here up on the Hill to testify before his committee, saying that he would be happy to give him an opportunity to address any potential things that the media has misreported about the Mueller investigation and give him an opportunity to speak for himself. So we'll see if that happens, and we'll see if he ends up here before the House Judiciary Committee on May 15th.
All right, Abigail Robertson reporting on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Abby.
Thanks, Abby. Well, we now want to bring in our political panel. Rick Klein is the political director for ABC News, and David Brody, CBN News chief political analyst. Join us now.
Well, Rick, let's start off with you. Are Democrats making the right move by possibly holding Bill Barr in contempt of Congress?
Well, the chicken episode last week may not have been the best way to make the case if you're a Democrat. But look, they have questions, and I think in trying to get the full report and trying to get Mueller, they have a push to make here. I found it interesting that Joe Biden, upon his entry into the campaign just last week, said the Democrats should be investigating. They shouldn't be impeaching unless they're blocked. And the blocking, we were already seeing the president signal that he does not want to see cooperation. He doesn't want to see Mueller testify. He doesn't want to see members of his cabinet, former advisors testify. So that, to me, is the more nuanced argument to make. I think they have every right to dig in. The president doesn't get to tell them what they do or don't investigate, and they have to make political judgments accordingly.
I'm also not quite sure of the end game here exactly. Okay, so you hold him in contempt, then what? The full House votes on it. Okay, he's now in contempt. Then what exactly? And when I mean then what, ultimately it's the Inspector General's, or excuse me, the Attorney General's office that will decide on Mueller. So now it wouldn't be Barr. I said on Mueller, on Barr. It wouldn't be Barr deciding on Barr, but it would be the Inspector General from the Attorney General's office deciding on Barr. So, I'm not quite sure of the Democrats' end game exactly.
Are you kind of saying they're maybe grandstanding here?
Oh, maybe. Just a little bit.
Rick, Mueller, a lot of people are saying that what can he provide if he does testify that's not already been provided in the full Mueller report?
Well, I think there's two different issues. One is, as came to light just last week, the perceptions that Mueller disagreed with, and he put it in writing, with how Barr was casting his report, and what kind of factors went into that, and how he communicated that. And I think a lot of Democrats are going to want to know, why didn't you make a judgment on obstruction of justice? He made a judgment not to make a judgment. Why did he punt on that? What did he think as a prosecutor? Did he have any thoughts on this? And the question that's being raised by a range of former prosecutors now, if this was anyone other than the president, would there be an obstruction case that would have been brought?
Great follow-up, and thank you for that perfect segue. So they're saying nothing right now. If he weren't president, if he weren't sitting in the Oval Office, yes. So does that mean that after he leaves office that we could potentially see charges?
I think when the president leaves office, he is potentially open to a range of issues, including some of the business relationships and things that we've seen out of the Southern District of New York. There's a lot of lingering questions about that. I find it hard to believe that any Justice Department will revive this once it's been deemed as a complete item by the Attorney General. And Barr has said and did say in the initial judgment this was based on his full reading of the facts, not even the precedent of not being able to charge a sitting president. But I do think that there are legal issues that could linger well beyond his time in the White House.
I will say on the Mueller report, I think who's going to win the soundbite war when Robert Mueller testifies? The Democrats are looking for the contextual soundbite of Robert Mueller saying, yeah, I had grave concerns, right? The quote, grave, and that's what they'll play. And then the Republicans will, hopefully what they'll get is, well, so, Mr. Mueller, are you saying bottom line, you couldn't bring yourself to any charges? Yes, that's what I'm saying. And they'll have the bottom line, no charges. So, who's going to have the winning soundbite, I think, will be very interesting to watch with the Mueller situation next week.
Well, changing topics here, we want to talk about 2020. Pete Buttigieg making headlines over the weekend for apparently going to Sunday school with former President Jimmy Carter. To you, Rick, faith clearly going to be a big issue in 2020.
It is, and I think you're seeing more Democrats led by Pete Buttigieg who are willing to talk openly about their faith. And I do think it's telling that he decides to visit former President Carter at his Sunday school class. That's an interesting setting. And Mayor Pete talks all the time about his Christian faith. It's interesting to have an openly gay man leading that part of the argument, but it's really not just him. And it's not just candidates checking the box of showing up in church on Sunday mornings like Joe Biden did in South Carolina over the weekend. There are a number of candidates, Cory Booker's another one, who talks about their faith in more open ways. And I feel like we've known that there are Democrats who believe strongly in their faith for a long time. For whatever reason, they have seemed to be less comfortable talking about that. I wonder if that's changing this cycle.
David, two-parter for you. Time magazine this week is featuring Pete Buttigieg with his husband on the cover of the magazine. First question, then we'll come back to that. Do you think he could win over evangelical voters? And secondly, is America ready for a first couple that looks like this?
Well, let's be clear. Let's just unpack that. Can he win over evangelical voters? I mean, in the macro, no. But it's not in the macro, right? Elections are won at the margins. It could be 1%, 2%, potentially, if he goes with the compassion angle from an evangelical Christian perspective, because Donald Trump's policies have been kind of cloaked in this non-compassionate way. So if Buttigieg, and with Jimmy Carter down there, once again, back to compassionate and that strain of evangelical Christianity, I think there is room to win at the margins, and I think that's what he's trying to do. Hillary Clinton did not try to inject faith at all in 2016, and it cost her.
And do you think America's ready for a first couple that looks like that?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, if you look at the polls, there was a poll. I think it's Quinnipiac. I can never say that word. Quinnipiac poll. It talked about 70% of folks are open to electing a gay president. 36%, however, say America's not ready to elect a gay president. The wording of that polling is pretty a little nuanced. But look, the poll numbers show 15 to 20% of an increase in people that would be okay with a gay president since 2007. So that's progress in their view, at least.
And most polls show that Joe Biden is the current front runner. Of course, this week we're hearing about, and last week we're hearing about his son Hunter's business dealings in China and Ukraine. Rick, how problematic is this for the former vice president?
It's going to be fair game. I mean, we've read already that there are allies of President Trump who are going to bring it up and trying to say, look, you have to worry about these foreign entanglements. I think it's among the things, the family connections are a big piece of what Joe Biden is, and it's going to be all these things that are subject to scrutiny. I'm curious as to whether any of the Democrats bring it up, because it seems like this is not a time for oppo hits on fellow Democrats. They feel so energized in going after President Trump. I wonder if they're going to go after him along the edges, and some of them are doing that in lighter ways. And Bernie Sanders just on this week, just yesterday, talking about how his record versus Joe Biden's record, I feel like they're going to be hitting policy a lot more than personality or even business entanglements.
Gentlemen, we have less than a minute left. I want you to weigh in real quickly on Cory Booker's gun policy. It's a little bit radical, basically national gun licensing.
Well, he's got a constituency in the Democratic Party. I think he's also going to have a lot of people on the other side of that argument who are going to be upset with seeing that. But I feel like you're going to have some policy arguments that try to lay that out.
I'm not sure it plays with independence necessarily in this country anytime you talk about gun rights or an infringement potentially on gun rights. But look, I think you're going to see conservatives make the argument. I'm waiting for Trump on Twitter to basically say, so Cory Booker wants the federal government to basically interview everybody a la passports. I don't know. I think it might be hard to play.
David Brody, Rick Klein, thank you both.
Thank you, guys.
Coming up, how the untimely death of a Christian author is sending ripple effects across the evangelical world. Well, a wave of reactions are pouring in after the death of popular Christian writer Rachel Held Evans. Evans spoke frequently at conferences for progressive Christians.
And she amassed a large following through her blog and books like A Year of Biblical Womanhood, and most recently, Inspired, Slaying Giants, Walking on Water, and Loving the Bible Again. Her popularity grew among people who identify as marginalized Christians as she challenged today's conservative evangelical culture. She died Saturday after brain seizures that caused swelling. Evans was 37 and leaves behind a husband and 2 children.
Well, joining us now is Julie Zalzmer, who covers religion, faith, and spirituality at The Washington Post.
Julie, great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Julie, of course, Rachel was many things to a lot of different people. In the end, though, she's someone who made a huge mark on modern Christian thought.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. She was a writer who could really speak across divides. She was read by men and women, by progressive and conservative Christians, by mainline Protestants and evangelicals. She really spoke to so many.
Well, Julie, one of the things that I found so interesting or fascinating is in the reaction to her initial medically induced coma. For people who knew her, they either loved her or hated her. Why did she draw such polar emotions?
Well, she was, in some sense, she was questioning the culture that she came from. She was in a conservative evangelical environment when she started raising questions. First with evolution was the first topic that she took on, and then ranging from there to sexuality and to gender and to biblical interpretation, all of these really big, tough questions. She was someone who was provocative in her environment and eventually ended up leaving that environment and joining an Episcopal church. It was definitely not an easy message to get across to her own community.
And Julie, she really exposed the rift within the evangelical community.
Mm-hmm. Especially on gender. I think that was probably the biggest issue, where she was willing to speak out and to cause a lot of people to question exactly what they believed themselves.
Julie, even some who didn't necessarily agree with her theologically, they're saying that her voice stirred healthy, vigorous debate. Why do you think some of her detractors still respect her?
Well, she was definitely careful in how she spoke, and careful to be kind and courteous and thoughtful in a time and in an environment like social media, like Twitter was where she did a lot of her communicating that is not always kind. She was somebody who was trying to demonstrate what it is to be a Christian voice in Twitter and in other environments where that's not easy.
Julie, why did she leave the evangelical church?
I think that this is a big question that she discusses in numerous books, but gender and sexuality and politics were big issues for her. She was leaving and was engaged in these discussions long before President Trump came around, but she was heartsick in many ways to see that conservative evangelicals who were her tribe at some point would support a president who she really did not, and that was something she wrestled with and wrote about a lot at what turned out to be the end of her life.
Julie Zalsmer, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Still ahead, live from New York, how a major pro-life event in the heart of Times Square could change hearts and minds.
Well, welcome back. The issue of life and protecting the unborn was front and center this weekend in Times Square. You were there, right?
I was. I was there with photojournalist Mario Gonzalez. Take a look.
Live from New York.
Fatherhood begins in the womb.
A star-studded pro-life event in the heart of Times Square.
There are live performances, speeches, all sorts of things happening here. But the main event is a live ultrasound.
There's those little lips.
The ultrasound was performed on Abby Johnson, a pro-life activist and the inspiration behind the movie Unplanned.
This is a baby. This right here is a baby. It's not a cat. It's not a parasite. This is a human being.
Focus on the Family says 10,000 people registered for the event. And it wasn't just the pro-life crowd that showed up. A large and very vocal group of protesters set up across the street. Focus on the Family initially hoped to use the billboards in Times Square, but President Jim Daley says their plans fell through.
Well, we had 12 weeks to plan the event, and so we went right to the Jumbotrons to see if we can rent the space. And initially, they all said yes in different ways. And then when we began to describe what we were going to do, they started not returning phone calls or saying that this would be too political and they're uncomfortable with it.
CBN News reached out to those companies. ABC, we do not accept live advertising on our Times Square video screen. And Clear Channel Outdoor, they never presented any artwork for review.
That's really not accurate. They knew exactly what we were going to do, and they told us they were uncomfortable with it.
Still, Live from New York turned out to be the city's largest ever pro-life event.
Jesus.
And that's encouraging news, especially in today's culture.
And New York may be considered the nation's abortion capital by a lot of people, but actually, John, 7 other states and the District of Columbia also have no restrictions on late-term abortion.
Well, great reporting out there.
Thank you. Yeah, quite an event.
Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.